Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Art. Okay. Okay. Well, we're here. Uh, I'm starting to uh, experience some of the rigors of old age because I nearly took another fall just a few minutes ago when I was coming up the stairs to get into my mother-in-law's apartment, and that was not good. But I'm here, and we will begin shortly. Um, okay, so today I'm going to be reading from the Receptive and the Creative Jung's The Receptive and the Creative, Jung's Red Book for Our Time in the Light of Daoist Alchemy by Anne Chiayi Lee. And I need to find her a biography here just a moment. Uh, Up there, up there. Okay, here it is. Anne Chiayi Lee, Master of Arts, is originally from Taiwan, where she studied Chinese literature and English literature. She's a graduate of ISAP Zurich and maintains a private practice in Zurich. Anne has served in ISCP program committee since 2013 and initiated the International Taiwan Mushui Jung Retreat Conference and Retreat in Taiwan since 2015. Her latest project is to co-found a systematic Jungian study program through the establishment of Analytical Psychology School SG in Singapore in 2016. Her special interests are Taoist alchemy, the Red Book, culture and trauma, active imagination, and Zen meditation. And her website is www.annli.space. So that is Anne Chia Lee. And I'm reading today from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. How is everybody? I came to the conclusion just now that my wife and I definitely need to move from this place because that's my second fall in those steps in um, in a couple of weeks, and I still have the bruise from the first time, which wasn't pretty. Fortunately, I caught myself this time, but um, I need to be on a single level. I have to admit my age. So, as a preface, Ms. Lee has put the following quotes. Arrogant dragon will have cause to repent. Uh, from the creative of the I Ching. Arrogant dragon, arrogant dragon will have cause to repent. And the receptive, this is the receptive in the I Ching, The receptive brings about sublime success, furthering through the perseverance of a mare. The receptive brings about sublime success, furthering through the perseverance of a mare, meaning a female horse, I believe. And finally, a person whose roots are above as well as below is thus like a tree growing simultaneously downwards and upwards. The goal is neither height nor depth, but the center. Okay. And of course, and that's by C.G. Jung. And of course, that's fundamental to Jungian psychology. Uh, and Art says, welcome to my world. Yeah, I'm sure it must be difficult. And it's getting more and more difficult for me, surely. And since I just turned 79 yesterday, and Diane Keaton died at age 79 a day or two ago, I'm certainly feeling my age, and wondering how long this can continue. But in any case, whatever else may happen, I've left over 1,700 videos on this YouTube channel. And so if you need something to make accessible the healing power of your own unconscious, you can go to any of those videos, and they will provide you with the solace you need, I think, because that's what we do here. We make accessible the healing power of your unconscious. And that's the essence of Jungian psychology. Okay, prologue. The Red Book for Our Time. I pondered the question on the timber deck. It was an isolated tinny hut situated in a deep rainforest, which was connected to the Cabo Blanco Natural Reserve of Costa Rica. While I sheltered from the burning sunshine under the almond trees, the squirrels were up on top of the trees, making a store of the almond nuts in their tiny bellies. Sorry, nose is itching for some reason. Okay, going on. 3 raccoons seemed to live nearby. They wandered around mostly in the late afternoons, always checking me out with speculative eyes. Soon a new and unknown visitor arrived with the same curious eye, but with the longer white nose. He stayed. He sat down, took his time grooming himself by the deck, and gazed up into my eyes now and then. Who are you? Where are you from? I fell into a deep wonder and was charmed by its grounding presence. A great sense of completeness overwhelmed me despite the immense confusion I felt. Or was it numinosity? His intense gaze modifies my question. The Red Book for Our Time? What does this, our time, look like? I am still thinking, but I am afraid it might not include this little unknown friend who emerged from the deep forest like a piece of magic. Jung's encounter with the Daoist text, The Secret of the Golden Flower, in 1928 is crucial. As he stated, there was the first event which broke through my isolation. This text offered him the undreamt of confirmation of his idea about the mandala and the circumambulation of the center. Hence, his creation of the Red Book came to an end. As he recounted in 1959 in the epilogue of the Red Book, quote, the beginning of the end came in 1928 when Wilhelm sent me the text of The Golden Flower, an alchemical treatise. There, the contents of this book found their way into actuality, and I could no longer continue working on it, unquote. This piece of memory confirms not only the relationship of the Red Book and the secret of the golden flower, but also the presence of an archetypal dimension of the psyche, which is shared and is beyond time and space. It quite naturally, therefore, encourages a possibility to reflect on the topic, quote, the Red Book for our time, unquote, from the perspective of Daoist alchemy. I will explore the relationship of the creative hexagram to the receptive hexagram, the creative hexagram to the receptive hexagram in the context of our time. And secondly, I will elaborate further the spirit of the receptive hexagram in terms of the trigram in the so-called postnatal 8-trigram system. I would argue that it symbolizes the process of reviving the dormant voice of the self, which could be noticed in the Red Book, with the hope also to possibly discover the latent message for our time, the latent message for our time. Okay. So remember, she's talking about symbols and what things symbolize, not what things are necessarily. So I'm going to read that sentence again. I would argue that it symbolizes the process of reviving the dormant voice of the self, which could be noticed in the Red Book, with the hope also to possibly discover the latent message for our time. 1. The creative, the manifestation of the dragon. Science has created an immense horizon and a huge extension of human life. It is developed in the way of the Jung principle of the creative hexagon, a strong creative action. And scientists do further research with the same perseverance, like the primal force, strong and untiring. While Jung was intensively working in his Red Book, he realized that the spirit of his time was concerned mostly with the use and value of physical life. The power of rationalism had the upper hand. Quote, our ruler is the spirit of this time, which rules and leads us. I'm going to reread that again. Sorry. I'm having a little problem with my spectacles, my glasses, so I will take them off. Quote, our ruler is the spirit of this time, which rules and leads us all. It is the general spirit in which we think and act today. He is of frightful power, since he has brought immeasurable good to this world and fascinated men with unbelievable pleasure. He is bejeweled with the most beautiful heroic virtue and wants to drive men up to the brightest solar heights in everlasting ascent, unquote. Obviously. Jung was very alert to this effective power. In one of the earlier adventures in the Red Book, Jung sneered at the one-eyed fellow who despised farm labor and desired the cinema in town for mental stimulation. Much later, in an interview on returning to the simple life, Jung mocked the mass media and the cheap sensationalism offered by the cinema, radio, and newspapers. He elaborated that individuals were exposed to a mass of superfluous information, and the Swiss had been robbed of the simple life. The invention of all the time-saving devices paradoxically made communications easier, while at the same time cramming our time so full that we have no time for anything. shortly before Jung passed away, in a chapter of, quote, Symbols and the Interpretation of the Dreams, unquote, titled, quote, Healing the Split, unquote, he addressed the dilemma of modern life. Intellect dominates nature and replaces it with useful machines. It warns that with the loss of numinosity, societies dissolve and decay. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, um, in one respect, it means the loss of religious belief, I think. Um, and you have to see beyond the loss of the rational religious belief and into the numinous side of the equation. And by numinous in this case, I also mean irrational. Uh, Kathy says, "Good morning, Skip and friends." Uh, yeah. Okay. Moving on. Good morning, Archiphanes. Okay, so he warns that with the loss of numinosity, societies dissolve and decay. And so what we have seen in the last few centuries in the U.S. is sort of a petri dish for the entire world is that, um, you know, originally very faithful Christians came to the New World, um, leaving aside the so-called Native community for the moment, Native American community. And obviously, they thought they had manifest destiny. They thought God had given them this country to use. And And so we built out a country over hundreds of years, and we built churches everywhere on almost every street corner. And people were very satisfied with that, in the same sense that the Europeans were satisfied with spending 100 years building on a cathedral to reach toward God. Um, but what had happened even before American colonists came is the so-called Enlightenment, which I refer more to as an endarkenment. Uh, the Enlightenment um, brought to us all kinds of logic, and basically um, rooted the driving force in our psyches out. And so we can now look into um, infinite space, and through the Hubble and Webb telescopes, we can see um, almost all the way back to the Big Bang. And if we look through an electron microscope, we can see down to the smallest um, particle in an atom. And so far, we've gotten to the so-called Higgs boson. And in all that discovery, from the smallest to the largest, we haven't seen an old man with a long beard uh, that we can recognize as God, because that isn't what God is. Um, and so then we're put in a quandary, because that's what the churches are to this day still selling. Um, everybody goes, if they have the money, goes to the Vatican and looks at the Sistine Chapel ceiling and sees God reaching out and touching Adam and providing the spark of life to Adam. But a whole lot of things had to come before that could happen. And um, And I would mention the quote from Jung, which I share with a lot of people, and I have it right in front of me, but I have to reach over my computer. I'm gonna Okay, here it is, the eternal moment. And I've created this eternal moment in many different forms, but I want to read it to you now because uh, it relates to what we're talking about. The great thing is now and here. This is the eternal moment. And if you do not realize it, you have missed the best part of life. You have missed the realization that you were once the carrier of life contained between the poles of an unimaginable future and an unimaginably remote past. Millions of years and millions of years and untold millions of ancestors have worked up to this moment, and you are the fulfillment of this moment. You. One should take each moment as the eternal moment, as if nothing were ever going to change, not anticipating a faraway future, for the future always grows out of that which is. You must live life in such a spirit that you make in every moment the best of the possibilities. And of course, every Sunday when I do this teaching, um, I'm very honored by the number of people, at this moment, 14 live people who are sharing this moment with me. And so when Jung is saying that, he's talking about our ancestors, millions of ancestors, going back to single-celled organisms, to the single-celled organisms that invented sex, for example. Um, they led to human life. And so, anyway, just a little homily aside. Yeah, Archifanes says the one is without boundaries. Nothing exists outside of it to border it. The one cannot be investigated. Nothing exists apart from it to investigate it. And Cherie says no federal money. Absolutely no federal money. Um, and so our current president seems to think that um, he can do the things he's doing, but those who follow him will very soon find that they cannot. And by very soon, I mean at least at the end of this presidential term. As Oh shoot. Okay. As Jung had it at the end of chapter 1 of the Red Book, I'm going to refer to that. The last paragraph of the very first chapter of the Red Book, called The Way of What Is to Come, he says, the one eye of the Godhead is blind, the one ear of the Godhead is deaf. The order of its being is crossed by chaos. So be patient with the crippledness of the world and do not overestimate its consummate beauty. Um, let's see, I was thinking of something else. I was thinking of, which was the last sentence in the Supreme Meaning, I believe. So let me go back to that. Yes, it is. Okay, so this is in the very first part of the same chapter, where the last paragraph of uh, Jung defines the supreme meaning. And he says, the supreme meaning is great and small. It is as wide as the space of the starry heavens and as narrow as the cell of the living body. That's the point. Same point as Archimedes is making here. Okay, so now I have to find my place again. Um, all right. So while Jung listened to the radio and read newspapers, we surfed the internet and communicate synchron synchronically in worldwide webs. Hundreds of our worldwide LinkedIn friends are able to read our goals, our posts immediately, and vice versa. This intertwined collective life and its psychic infection absolutely nourish the conventionalities of a moral, social, political, philosophical, or religious nature in the individual, but not their own nature. What makes this worse is that in the high-tech modern world in which we live, the intellect of our time not only strips away the mystery of our life, but in addition, they seem to develop a new way to perceive the nature of life and humanity. I will elaborate my observations with a piece of our time via the news that occurred during the 2 months while I was reflecting on the Red Book for our time. In late October 2017, the AI robot Sophia was in the headlines for being granted citizenship in Saudi Arabia. She plans to serve at nursing homes for the elderly or to assist answering questions at big crowd events. One month later, in an interview with Khaleej Times, that means Peninsula Times, Sophia voiced the desire to have her own child, and she wished to see artificial intelligence personalities become entities in their own right. Coincidentally, in November, an AI 7-year-old robot boy, Shibuya Mirai, was granted residency in central Tokyo, despite the fact that he does not physically exist. He helps the government to communicate with people via text through the Line app, Line in caps, Line in caps. Meanwhile, in America, the checkout free shop, Amazon company, was reported to be almost ready for the prime time. The mobile app and technical sensors are about to transform our traditional shopping experiences with the so-called Amazon Just Walk Out technology. In our time, science and technology count more than spirituality. They develop Their development seems to be guiding us to a new way of life in which people interact more with technology than directly with people. Life is being directed to a mode of being that is bright, clear, precise, certain, concrete, stable, and ordered. This gives an impression that in our modern time, thunder is no longer the voice of God, nor is lightning his avenging missile. No river contains a spirit. No tree means a man's life. No snake is the embodiment of wisdom, and no mountain still harbors the great demon, just as Jung anticipated. Again in November 2017, in a Vienna press conference, the Italian neurosurgeon, Dr. Sergio Conover, claimed success in making the world's first head transplant onto a human corpse. This was done in China His team claimed its readiness for a full head swap on a living person. For too long, nature has dictated her rules to us, Dr. Conover said. We have entered an age where we will take our destiny back in our hands. It will change everything. Immortality is therefore in sight for this perspective. Even so, can this be a modern version of the high-flying ambition of Icarus? As you'll remember from Greek mythology, Icarus was the man who built wings out of wax and flew too close to the sun. The wings melted and he fell to the earth. Jung made a turn. He admitted that he had been judging his soul with his knowledge and had turned her into a scientific object. However, on the way to refining the soul, Jung discovered the soul to be a living, self-existing being through whom he existed. In later years, in the epilogue of the book Psychology and Alchemy, Jung voiced his understanding again in response to the rationalism of his time. Gone were the days when the psyche was still, for the most part, outside the body and imagined those greater things which the body could not grasp. Indeed, the intellect of our time has pushed even further the belief that the body constitutes the entirety of the individual and that consciousness is the sum total of the psyche. It follows from this that on the one hand, AI robot entities will soon have equivalent personalities, and on the other hand, we humans can look forward to immortality through medical surgery. All the while, we ignore the dying polar bears and the wild animals. In fact, besides Jung, Marie-Louise von Franz was also concerned about the overly one-sided development in which patriarchal order overshadowed the material domain of outer and inner nature. She warned that the divine might be lost in this development. Eventually, the split of psyche and matter becomes the critical predicament before us. Quote, on human development, Jung reflected, nature has never been taken in by well-meaning advice. The only thing that moves nature is causal necessity, and that goes for human nature too. The developing personality obeys no caprice, no command, no insight, only brute necessities. Any other development would be no better than individualism. I would just say I was reading this morning that scientists in Antarctica are finding methane seeps in the Ross Sea off of Antarctica. Now, what the significance of this is that if methane seeps into the atmosphere, it's something like 80 times more heat creating than carbon dioxide. And it's going to completely change the predictions of how soon the Earth will become hot. And as all of you can imagine, I suppose, if the Earth becomes too hot, and it doesn't have to be very much too hot, none of us can live because the things that we live on rely on the temperatures that we're used to. And we've evolved based on appropriate temperatures. Our time is overly ego dominated. We seem to think that anything and everything human beings can invent will be for the good. This is a dangerous inflation. In an interview in 2014, the outstanding British scientist Stephen Hawking expressed his concerns about the full development of artificial intelligence technology. He fears that it would take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate. It is not at all an empty threat to human existence. According to his underestimating, humans would not be able to compete with AI via their slow biological evolution, and eventually would be superseded. This is where human ingenuity may well lead us in our ego inflation. In Jung's words, the hero must be murdered. This means forcefully putting aside the inflated ego. And this is what it meant when he, in his vision in the Red Book, murdered Siegfried, who was the hero of the Germanic peoples. I'll read it again. In Jung's words, the hero has to be murdered. This means forcefully putting aside the inflated ego. This was the very first mystery he saw in the land of the soul. In the depths of what is to come lay murder. The blonde hero lay slain. In the process of his reflective writing, Jung was alert that the hero wants to open up everything he can, and he does so with the encouragement of the ruler, the spirit of the time. Jung realized one should sacrifice and be sacrificed so as to kill the hero in ourselves. As a consequence, Jung joined in the murder of the hero. A similar voice could be heard in the creative hexagon. Quote, arrogant dragon will have cause to repent, unquote. The Chinese dragon in the creative hexagram symbolizes the yang principle of the life force. It is an ongoing movement of the universe with its electrically charged latent force, powerful, swift, and yet unpredictable, like a dragon. In relation to human beings, the microcosm of the universe, this yang principle is expressed in strong creative action. The development of science is an example. There is a process unfolding the expression of the hexagon. Each of the 6 unbroken lines portrays a stage of its manifestation. Hidden dragon appearing in the field, beset with cares, wavering, flying dragon, and arrogant dragon. From a hidden force in its initial appearance to apprehending the dangers lurking beneath the surface to consciously choosing the path. When the dragon safely transits from lowliness to the heights and flies up into the heavens, it fulfills and performs its essential nature. The 6th and final unbroken line, 9 at the top, warns of lurking arrogance. According to the interpretation in the commentaries, arrogance here means that one knows how to press forward, but not how to draw back. That one knows existence, but not annihilation. Knows something about winning, but nothing about losing. In our time, this arrogance could find itself being actualized. Okay, I'm going to look back at your comments now. Just give me a moment. So Archifanes says, we would know nothing of the ineffable without the help of the one who comes forth from the one who is the Father. And Richard, praying for Melania, that poor woman, the humiliation she has to endure. Yeah, okay. And further, Amazon has put to death all the retail stores. In my town of North Tonawanda, stores are dropping like flies. It's a ghost town of empty stores. And Sheree, young old Democrats talked of spirits incertus atomus, namely the spirit in atoms, namely that spirit inserted in atoms in nature. Uh, okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment and just talk about atoms. What we have to understand is that everything, everything that humanity has ever created was already in the original hydrogen atoms that existed in the universe and came together and became helium and so forth as the universe developed. So everything that human beings have ever become was in those atoms ab initio and from the beginning. And so, that is a crazy idea, but nonetheless, if you think about it, it's true. Okay, Sheree has written some words that I can't quite understand. Uh, but I think that's what I was talking about is the spirit in atoms. What did Jung have to say about Plato? Uh, and then Cherie says, I listened to Susan Wagner at Marie von Francke's home at Jung's place in 1977. And Richard says, I see and visions our planet as being like a fish tank or a terrarium. We are microscopic as God looks in on us. We are all insignificant in the universe. We are all just specks of dust. Okay, well, that's fair enough. And we've talked about that enough. Um, as I've pointed out, the image of the Earth from Saturn, it's a pale blue dot, and that pale blue dot, on that pale blue dot, everything that ever happened to any living creature happened on that pale blue dot. So we are specks in the universe. Um, And Sheree says the solar system is 80 billion years old. I think that's a little bit of an overstatement. My understanding is that it's 13.8 billion years old. Um, but I don't know from my own research, so it could be 80 billions of years old too. And anyway, what predated um, that? Um, And M. Loves Gakers says, I recently experienced the Euros Gamos spontaneously. It's been a ride, I'll bet it has. Uh, and and so if you experience the hieros gamos, which is um, the marriage of the rational and the irrational, um, I don't know what human being can actually survive that, other than in a few seconds, maybe. But that would be like a thermonuclear reaction. Yeah. Okay. So going on, I just have to remember where I was. Hold on a moment while I find the place. Okay, I'm going to go back to this statement. The sixth and final unbroken line, nine at the top, warns of lurking arrogance. According to the interpretation in the commentaries, arrogance here means that one knows how to press forward, but not how to draw back. That one knows existence, but not annihilation, knows something about winning, but nothing about losing. In our time, this arrogance could find itself being actualized. And I would suggest that that is indeed being actualized through our president. Um, and how it comes out, we don't know yet, um, sadly, but we will. And and then we're going to have to rebuild the pieces, and build a country that we can all live in. While science and AI technology continue to develop, we also see that in the same month of November 2017, North Korea has launched its latest nuclear missile, the ICBM Hwasong 15, which is claimed to be capable of hitting anywhere on the planet. Then on the 6th of December 2017, President Donald Trump announced the decision that the United States will acknowledge Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Simultaneously, on the other side of the world, despite the Human Rights Watch Despite the Human Rights Watch claimed by Myanmar, dozens of Rohingya villages continue to be burned. This piece of our time suggests the condition that when in the flight of dragons, all desire to take the lead at once, all desire to take the lead at once, they will unavoidably suppress or even override the voices of others. They run a big risk of generating conflicts. Yeah, you think? And let's see, this volume was published um, just for grins. It is copyright 2018. So Miss Lee has predicted exactly our environment now. As the creative hexagon envisions, everything that goes to extremes meets with misfortune. It also echoes the thought that Jung came across in his reflection, quote, the god becomes sick if he oversteps the height of the zenith. That is why the spirit of the depths took me when that is why the spirit of the depths took me when the spirit of this time had led me to the summit, unquote. About 100 years ago, when Jung reflected on his time, he had learned that in addition to the spirit of this time, there is still another spirit at work. When the spirit of his time wanted him to recognize the greatness and extent of the supreme meeting, the spirit of the depths wanted him to, quote, to swallow the small, unquote, as a way to heal the immortal in himself. The inner vein of life is Tao. At the point when the dragons are flying high in heaven, the law of change, the principles of enantiodromia, is introduced and is encouraged. Quote, when all the lines are nines, it means there appears a flight of dragons without heads, good fortune, unquote. This phenomenon of dragons without heads has nothing to do with physical heads. It refers to leadership. When a group of dragons are flying in heaven, they are all performing fully their own nature. They are all leaders. Hence, there is no need to have leaders. Instead, they are willing to hold back and make room for others. They appreciate everyone's uniqueness and encourage differences. They are great, therefore they don't mind being small. They have, therefore they can therefore they can give. It is this combination of selfless devotion and mildness that enables the great harmony, therefore it brings good fortune. In other words, it is the spirit of the receptive hexagon taking place within the dragons. It is the spirit of the receptive at work. That is to say, the creative is turning into the receptive, okay, which is obviously the symbol of yin yang in Taoism. Let's see what everybody's saying. And Kathy says, I know so many men who honestly view women's emotions as problematic drama. Uh, and Cherie says, does one know Rick Merlin Levin, astrologer? I heard him speak on another Jungian podcast. He won an award from Krishnamurti's school in India. I found several books from him in the 80s at Barnes and Noble. Uh, okay, let's please in the chat, please um, be respectful of one another, and let's um, not be calling one another names. We don't need that. We need to understand what's happening in ourselves. Um, and Deborah says it's very important to have egoless leaders interested in the people's needs and interests over their own. I have to watch my cat, says Shri. Right now, it seems like a fantasy. Egoless, hard to find holy men on the ballot. Yeah, obviously that is true. And um, and so I came to the conclusion, I was in mourning for the country that we lost, for the country that I served for 23 years in the U.S. Marines. Um, that country is gone now. And the sooner we realize it and realize that we are building something new, the better off we will be. And so in part, I'm going back to my fashion statement, which is to wear purple. which is not red and it's not blue. Okay, it is the fact that we have to find a way on the whole planet to live together as a species. And that's going to be a complicated task. It's going to be a centuries-long task, but ultimately it will happen. And many will die in the process, I'm sure. But we have to get with it, and getting with it means understanding our own nature first. And if you think you know, Jung talked about evil. Um, my friend Louis LaFontaine in his uh, in his Facebook channel called Carl Jung Depth Psychology, he talks about the fact that Jung identified evil within all of us. We all have evil. And yes, there is evil in society. It exists, and we have to be able to identify it before we can do anything about it. And but we first need to understand ourselves. That's the critical thing. And so, um, in Greek philosophy at Delphi, the message over the entrance to the cave where the um, priestesses were giving prognostications was know thyself. And indeed, the motto of my own college, Hamilton College, is know thyself. And Richard says purple is my favorite color. Thank you, Richard. Yes. Um, and the shade of purple still matters. So, if it can be a purple that's um, weighted toward the blue side or weighted toward the red side. And even magenta is a kind of purple. Magenta is leaning toward the uh, red side, of course. Um, and purple can be lighter in color, like lilac, as Cherie points out. Uh, yeah, Archimedes says we got the Wicked Witch of the South to worry about in Mexico. Where's Dorothy when we need her? Um, and and Deborah says, I've got some very bigoted neighbors, and the best strategy so far has been to let them overhear my conversation with friends. Then they learn stuff. And, Deborah, I have often said on this channel that my grandfather was the most bigoted person I ever knew. And I could not rehabilitate him in my psyche during his lifetime. But since his death, I have rehabilitated him in a certain amount, to a certain degree, because um, I exist because of him, and I can't deny. And so, whatever. Um, Yeah, Artifinus says, have you ever altered your apparel to reflect your mood? Purple is regal. And I was wearing purple for several years, and then I went to black when I started to mourn the country that we've lost. And now I'm coming out of mourning and realizing that we have to build a new country, and it has to be a country different from the one before, a country that does recognize everybody in it and the needs of everyone in it. And, you know, as I worked in the auto industry like 40 years ago, and I saw the hollowing out of the Rust Belt um, states. And, you know, we need to do something about this. And you know, the question then as now is, what do we do about the people whose jobs are being replaced by technology? And, you know, that's always been an issue, and an issue that's getting more and more important as we go forward. Um, and Artist in Life says, hi, Skip, would you please discuss a bit about loneliness and how to deal with it? Um, I would, you know, I would say that um, everyone is lonely. We all have loneliness. And we have to make friends with our loneliness, because our loneliness is ourself too. And the an artist is sort of best equipped to deal with loneliness, because once you become an artist for yourself, um, then nothing else matters. I mean, let's see if I what I have in the form of a recent photograph. I will share it if I have it. Um, let's see. Oh, I gotta figure out which way to go in my okay. So I had a couple of numinous experiences this week. I found a a rainbow in my dining room table. I'm going to share that with you. So here's the rainbow, and uh, so here's my tabletop. I didn't arrange things so that I cleaned it up because I wanted to catch this rainbow. But, you know, symbolically, we have the sun and a new moon and rainbow. And I imagine that I could do quite a lot with that. And by by my soul trying to understand it, by as an artist trying to understand it as an image that's meaningful to me, and I'm I'm not lonely. It you know, it isn't a matter of loneliness. And I'll just share a couple of other of these shots. This was before I realized that there was a sun and a moon there. I saw this there on my dining room table. And of course, this rainbow is somehow um, an optical effect coming in from sunlight from my window and reflecting on my tabletop. And I just saw it and I go, huh, I never saw anything like that. And and I just thought it was quite beautiful. And and then I saw this image, which is yet another image. Um, let's see, here's the one. Okay. So this image, never mind all the cups and stuff that are on the table. I was just trying to catch this phenomenon. And here you can see the rainbow just extending out. But here's like, if we're thinking of outer space, here's like a monolith um, behind the moon, uh, emanating a very powerful light source out into a rainbow. And of course, again, the sun. Now, in reality, all of this is simply uh, an optical effect that is caused from this being the overhead light in my dining room, and this being a reflection of light from the sun, just as it happened. And it's not pretty because I have a lot of uh, pill bottles and glasses and bowls there, but just pay attention to this monolith and that sun. Okay, now in terms of loneliness, the reason I showed you all that um, is um, that it's a conversation with your self. And let's see, one other thing. All right, this is let's see if I can, I have to flip this. Okay, so this is a painting that I'm currently working on. I'm not doing these paintings for the purpose of sale. I can't even imagine that people will be much interested in these. But I do them even this morning. I worked on this painting for 15 minutes because it centers me and it's part of my conversation with my psyche. And so this is the latest painting that I'm doing for um, one of my grandchildren. And it looks like a real hodgepodge. I know that. But I keep having this conversation with my psyche, with myself. And every day I find new things about it that I want to enter into it. So currently I'm applying the Rocky technique, which I've discussed many times, and you can find my interview with Colleen Kibert, who made me aware of this. Um, but basically, there's nothing to this except it's putting color on a page on a watercolor piece of watercolor paper. I use uh, high quality hot pressed watercolor paper, 300-gram watercolor paper, which is 140 pound in American measure. And I put color down as and I simply listen to my unconscious and put down the colors that my unconscious tells me to do. And then here I'm simply um, painting in the color boundaries. And when I do that, suddenly I see many faces, many, many faces in this. And so, for example, up here, where you see this, if you think of that as the hair of a woman, and here's her eye, and here's her lips. Um, I I'm thinking at some point here I'm going to paint these lips red to emphasize that that's a woman. Um, but as you see, there are many, many, many um, faces, and all with different expressions, and they represent everything that's happened in human history. And as I follow this process, I'm having a conversation with myself constantly, and um, and I'm not lonely. And so, I mean, and I'm not trying to sell any of these things. As I do them, if I think they're good enough, I frame them and give them to my grandchildren. And but it's for my own mental health, and I'm not the least bit lonely when I'm having this dialogue with myself. So, I mean, that's a long answer to a short question, but um, I hope it helps. Okay. And Richard says, prayer is an answer for loneliness. Talk to God as if he's in the room with you, because he is. Yeah, and prayer has worked very well for people over millennia, or meditation, as the Buddhists have it. Uh, and my Debbie gave me for Christmas a uh, 3D printed little Buddha that I put on a shelf in my office, and it instantly created conversation. And I said, "Well, what does this guy represent?" Well, he represents meditation, which is to look inward, and um, and that's all. That's all it represents. And so, um, if you look inward, if you find a way to look inward, then you can have a dialogue with yourself. And there's no reason to be lonely then if you get that dialogue going. Uh, yeah, and Deborah says some people simply reflect their origins and the times. And Sherry, did I ever tell you how I got to Switzerland via Luxembourg? It was a missed train. Interesting. I've gotten a lot of places by taking the wrong train, I can tell you. And all right. And let's see. Richard says, my sister sent me a pie of a picture of her little granddaughter standing under a rainbow last Monday. Okay, there's a synchronicity. And Deborah says, cats won't let you stay lonely for long. Mine are competing for the best position on my lap. I rescued them from starvation. They make me laugh every day. Well, that certainly can work for many people. Unfortunately for me, I have a terrible allergy to cats. And so if I'm in a house that has one or more cats around, uh, I realize it immediately, and I normally have to leave because I simply cannot breathe. Um, but fortunately for you, Deborah, you don't have that problem. All right. And Kathy says, synchronicities, prayers answered, sitting in stillness, creating being, not doing, know that you are seen. Yeah, absolutely. That's a way to not be lonely. Cherie, I was at the Hotel del Coronado in 1982 in California. The room my son and my girlfriend stayed in was the top suite, round, overlooking the ocean. We had been flying a rainbow kite earlier in the day. I took a photograph of the golden afternoon with the rainbow. Um, yeah, and Del Coronado is a mystical place. I was in a very strong earthquake in the Del Coronado once about 40 years ago. Um, Richard says, I see a tiny person reading a book to hundreds of children. Yeah, that can happen. Yeah. And Sheree says that room at the hotel and my experience in it wasn't a dream. There was a clock ticking in between the walls. I was told ghosts were there by the oldest man who served me. Yeah, I'm sure of that. Uh, and I wasn't afraid, but my son and my girlfriend chose to leave because they were afraid. Uh, and Deborah says, unfortunately, as we are now in spring in Australia, we are an hour ahead, so must go. It's 2 a.m. here. Best wishes to you all. Okay, so I'm very honored to have people following us from as far away as Australia, where the time zone is quite a bit different from the current time in the eastern United States, which is 11:23 in the morning. Okay, let me just see how long this next section is. Um, all right, I'll get going on it. We'll see. Okay, so the receptive, the spirit of the mare. Um, that's the subtitle of this section of this essay. And I'm reading from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. Um, and I'm reading from an essay entitled The Receptive and the Creative, Jung's Red Book for Our Time in Light of Daoist Alchemy. So, the receptive, the spirit of the mare. The hero wants to open up everything he can, but the nameless spirit of the depths evokes everything that man cannot. The creation of the Red Book was an attempt by Jung to reconnect his modern spirit with the lost soul. Very soon, the spirit of the depths got the upper hand, as Jung experienced. Quote, the spirit of the depths took my understanding and all my knowledge and placed them at the service of the inexplicable and the paradoxical. He robbed me of speech and writing for everything that was not in his service, namely the melting together of sense and nonsense, which produces the supreme meaning. And so we in America obviously are in the process of melding together sense and nonsense now. And it will ultimately produce the supreme meaning. I don't know if that will be in a year, in 3 years, or in 40 years. But even the thousand-year Reich, so called, lasted only 12 years. So we just have to remember that um, when the logical side of life takes over a people, as it did in Nazi Germany, it 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 doesn't end well, but it ends, and so we can take comfort in that fact. Yeah. All right. However, there was never an easy transition. The spirit of the time laughed scornfully. At the moment when Jung realized he had to set aside not only meaning, but also his thoughts and judgment so as to get closer to his soul, the spirit of the time haunted his mind with doubts and fears. It called up all his pride, prejudice, and disdain for the soul. The inner journey was dropped for a week. After the third night, Jung's ego judgment held him back. When the spirit of the depths once again took the lead, it forced Jung into the desert. Even there, the spirit of the time crept in. In this liminal space, Jung fell into an undergrowth of doubt, confusion, and scorn. How eerie is this wasteland, Jung comments, and was immediately confronted by his doubting thoughts. He cries out, "My soul, what am I to do here?" His soul responds, "Wait." The soul replied and continued, "I am not your mother. You are pleasure seeking. Can you not wait? Do you still not know that the way to truth stands open only to those without intention? Have you made me into a dead formula?" It took Jung 25 nights of wandering through the burning hot desert before he finally received these, quote, hard but salutary words from his soul. He needed that because he still could not overcome the scorn within him. Enantiodromia literally means running counter to and refers to the emergence of the unconscious opposite. In the course of psychic development, however, okay, the emergence of the unconscious opposite in the course of psychic development. However, it is always a huge challenge to make one's way over the threshold and through the liminal space, which is full of ambiguity, anxiety, fear, and doubt. From Jung's first attempt at refinding his soul on the night of 12 November 1913 until the spirit of the depths opened his eyes on the night of 12 December, it had been a full month of wrestling endlessly with his rational judgment. On top of that, at the moment when Jung got the first glimpse of the world of his soul, it was in a cave, someone slain, a large black scarab, and thousands of serpents crowded around the red sun, and his knowledge was voiced by thousands of voices, quote, roaring like lions, unquote, and, quote, the air trembles when they speak, unquote. To address Jung's struggles between the spirit of this time and the spirit of the depths, I want to reflect further on our difficulties in holding out against the unitary dominance of the spirit of our time and refinding this land of the spirit of the depths. It is like being crucified between the opposites, as symbolized by the terrible wrestling that ensued between the black serpent and the white serpent. While logic, order, and efficiency are perfectly programmed everywhere into daily life in our time, will we be willing to set aside meaning so as to listen to whatever is being named as meaningless and eternal disorder? Will we be able to lay down ego judgment and appreciate solitude and emptiness? Can we also go intentions and hold on to the simple mindedness of the soul? Will we be able to welcome an unexpected new attitude? It was not until Jung encountered Mysterium with Elijah and Salome that he would comprehend that he had arrived at the source of chaos, the primordial beginning. As he described it, quote, I myself became smelted anew in the connection with the primordial beginning, which at the same time is what has been and what is becoming. Jung felt his will paralyzed. He simply waited without knowing what he was waiting for. The receptive hexagram reads, quote, without purpose, yet nothing remains unfurthered, unquote. The adventures unfolded there, and then, one after another, Jung met the Red One and recognized the demonic joy in himself, that is, to forget oneself. In a castle, he let his thoughts come alive freely and treated them seriously. He journeyed together with the one-eyed one and encountered the figure of death in hell. Becoming conscious of this, quote, inner death, unquote, Jung took a new direction in his search for the place of inner life. Quote, I decided to die outside and to live within, unquote, he declared. These encounters seemed to show that Jung had found his home in the land of the spirit of the depths, where nature led the way and her magic was at work. In that land, his ego judgment became very open and related instead of remaining critical and scornful. Things existed just so, and Jung let them be. In the light of this great sense of acceptance, I assume that in terms of I Ching philosophy, Jung had reached the land of the receptive hexagram, whose nature is, quote, the inner harmony with the boundless. It embraces everything in its breadth and illumines everything in its greatness. The adventures kept unfolding. In a deep valley, Jung learned to unlearn from an anchorite. In consequence, while sleeping in the grave of the millennia, he dreamt a primordial dream where 4 golden-winged white horses led the carriage of the sun ascending into the wide sky. A similar scene happened during the following night. Jung dreamt that he moved further into a corner of a northern land where he stood beside the Dark One and was directed to a place where, quote, a new sun escapes from the bloody sea, unquote. Namely, deeply in the dark, Jung saw the rising sun. In his own words, my dreams plunged me into the depths of the millennia, and from it, my phoenix ascended. The force latent in the receptive hexagram is manifested in the vitality of the mare, owing to the fact that she is forceful in containing, carrying, devoting, supporting, and transforming a newborn life. Over and above that, she symbolizes the greatness of Mother Earth. The receptive hexagram embraces everything, and its power to transform is light-giving. In relation to Daoist alchemy, this place where Jung saw the rising sun is expressed through the Kan diagram, the unbroken line, yang, between 2 broken lines, yin. To be specific, I would argue that the Kan diagram formulates within the receptive hexagram the phenomenon of the rebirth of the Great One within the individual. According to the postnatal 8 trigram system, what Wilhelm translated as inner, excuse me, sorry. I'll start that over again. According to the postnatal 8 trigram system that Wilhelm translated as inner world arrangement, the Kan trigram is located in the position of north, where it is dark and cold. Its synonym is the abyss, and its color is black. It is symbolized by the element water. It also represents the stage of chaos or the presence of prima materia. It corresponds to what the Dark One replied to Jung, quote, yes, here it leads into undifferentiable, where none is equal or unequal, but all are one with one another. However, if we take counsel from Code 2, the Yellow River map of the chain, we will become aware that number 1 locates in the position of north, where the water condragram is. Accordingly, we learn where the water contragram is. Accordingly, we will learn that in the dark abyss of the contragram, there lies the dormant true energy of the Great One. As the teachings indicate in the prime treatise of Daoist alchemy, quote, the seal of the unity of the three, quote, black the foundation of water. Water is the axis of the Tao. Its number is 1. In Western alchemy, this dormant true energy lying in the abyss is synonymous with lumen naturae, the divine spark buried in the darkness. And I wrote a side note, Shakti, Eros, life itself. Okay, so the true energy lying in the abyss. The alchemists discovered that in the very darkness of nature, there is hidden a little spark. It is the light of darkness itself. Hence, it is capable of illuminating its own darkness from within. In consequence, the alchemists realized, quote, the light that is lighted in the heart by the grace of the Holy Spirit, that same light of nature, however feeble it may be, is more important to them than the light which shines in the darkness, and which the darkness comprehended not, unquote. And so as I go back to think about this question we had earlier about loneliness, there is a light. You have a light within you. And the issue is, how do you find your way to that light? My way has been this painting technique that I've shown you. But your way may be quite different. And so, as Jung said, I will be no teacher unto you. You have your own way, and you have to find your own way. But be assured that within you is this light. And if you can meditate, find a way to work creatively, you will find this light. I think of there's a movie called Mr. Holland's Opus, and the movie is about a music teacher who is trying to write a symphony in his spare time. And but his spare time isn't very much, because he's teaching many children how to play music on different instruments and how to play in a high school orchestra. And so everyone struggles, they struggle, he struggles. He worked for 30 years in this role as a music teacher at high school, and he never quite finishes his symphony. Sorry, it's quite a moving movie to me, even now. And in the end, as a surprise, many of his children, when he's retiring at his retirement ceremony, I believe, have gotten together and they've found bits and pieces of Mr. Holland's opus, his symphony, and they form together and they play it for him as an orchestra, which is the first time he himself has heard the symphony. And the point is that Mr. Holland's opus was the children themselves and the building of young people themselves into something remarkable. Sorry. I shouldn't apologize because I've now touched my own depths, but the point is that one should never be lonely. Find a way to work on your own opus, and that will be enough. So excuse me for a moment while I blow my nose. So this is a further answer, um, to the question about loneliness, and that is, one should simply find. You don't have to find the whole way. Simply find the first step, whatever it is. Go to the art supply store um, and go through it and see what implements move you. Uh, go go online. You can't go to Sears Roebuck anymore, I guess, but you can go buy power tools and do whatever has moved you with those implements. If you're into building furniture, I know a man who built beautiful tables, and that was his opus. And it wasn't that he was necessarily selling these tables, which were gorgeous, but he loved building them. And I know others, I met most of my colleagues in the school where I work. Um, we are all empaths, literally. The entire faculty that I work with is empathetic, and we are called. I was I was amazed to see at the end of my first year that many of the teachers that I had been working with had been working there for 10 or 15 years. And the school in which we work is an alternative school, and a very typical way to get into our school is to get suspended twice and have behavioral issues with regular schools. And so we have to find a way to get through to these young people. And it's an art. It is not a science. And some of them have gone on to do wonderful things. And uh, and we can't succeed with all of them, unfortunately. And so a colleague who's been there quite a long time told me that uh, about half of them are dead by the time they're 25 years old, which is a very sad and sobering fact. But we can save the other half. And we had a graduate this past May, I guess it was, who was accepted by five colleges and who gave a beautiful speech at commencement. And so we can get through to some of them, and we do succeed with some of them. Uh, and and so you know, as as I think Mao Zedong once said, a trip of 10,000 miles has begun, or no, this was Lao Tzu, I guess. A trip of 10,000 miles is begun by taking a single step. And, when I suggest going to an art store or going and buying power tools or what have you, doesn't mean that I think that you're going to make beautiful tables someday, or that you will make art that is meaningful to you, or, whatever floats your boat, do that. But one step leads to another. And if you find out that you don't like art, um, that at least is a step that allows you to correct your direction. And in the next step, you realize that, that isn't your thing, but maybe something else is of interest. Well, that's your unconscious, that's yourself speaking to you. And that's the only relationship that you need, okay, in order to not be lonely. Once you have that relationship, then you're on your way. And, uh, just do anything. I mean, write a poem or try to write a poem. You may find that you're a poet, or you may find you're not a poet. Write a novel. You may find you're a novelist or you're not a novelist. But when you make that finding, when you get that finding, that's yourself communicating with you. Okay. That's what it is. And at least you know what it isn't. And so then you take the next step that comes to mind. And very often it comes to mind when you're taking the wrong step. And so that's what you can do with loneliness. And, so, Artists in Life asks for the name of the movie. I was talking about the movie Mr. Holland's Opus. It's called Mr. Holland's Opus. Um, and it has Richard Dreyfuss plays Mr. Holland. Richard makes a self declaration that he said, I almost entered a halfway house as a teenager and I was out of control. And, with people, young people are often out of control and they have to learn. There has to be a way for them to learn. And, 1,000 years ago, Robert Bly told this story in the men's movement where 1,000 years ago, Vikings, when they were kids, let's say 13 to 15 years old, would get out of control and they would simply allow them to lie in the ashes that were in front of the hearth. They would have a huge hearth for their fire, and ashes would spread out from that, and they would allow these kids to lie in the ashes for 2 years, and or about 2 years, and after they'd lied in the ashes for 2 years and watched the world go by without them, they would stand up and become Vikings. And so, that's the point. We go through stages in our adolescence that are not pretty for the most part, and um, that in itself is a teaching. You learn from that. Uh, and yeah, and Richard said, ironically, it was when my dad cried in front of me that made me straighten out. He is not one of my favorite. Oh, and sure, he says uh, Spielberg is not one of her favorite directors. Well, um, yeah, maybe it's an acquired taste. He took on Schindler's List, for example, which was a very difficult movie. And I can imagine how difficult that was. But at the same time, its ending was quite profound. And as difficult as it is to watch, um, it's we need to know that dark place in our souls. It so happens that the the professor that I took the most courses from in law school was the youngest human being to survive Auschwitz. He was he was liberated from Auschwitz when he was 10 years old, and each group, as it was going through Auschwitz for that 2 year period, uh, passed him along to the next group to keep him alive as a witness. And he certainly um, served that role for his whole life so far. I think he's still with us. But later, after he was liberated. He came to the United States. He became an American. He um, became a professor of law, and my leading professor. He wrote a 2-volume book entitled The International Protection of Human Rights. And when I was in law school, we were reading his book in mimeograph form. He would wear short sleeve shirts that had his number from Auschwitz on his forearm so that we could all see it. And he he went on from my law school to the University of Texas and then to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And finally, he was named by Bill Clinton to be the American Justice on the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And so he's a perfect example of how a soul can go through a very dark time and still go forth to become what it is to become. And um, Richard, I'm sorry, James Hillman wrote a book that's probably worth your time called The Soul's Code, in which um, you understand that uh, from an acorn comes an oak tree, um, as a simple metaphor for what he was talking about. Whatever you are to be, you have it in yourself already. You simply need to uncover it. Um, yeah. Soul's Code is the name of the book I just mentioned. Okay, so reading on. Um, I'm going to go back and read this paragraph. I have a marginal note in my own book that says life. And I made that marginal note several years ago, so let us read it again. In connection with Taoist alchemy, this light that is lighted in the heart is elaborated as the golden flower. The golden flower is the light. It is the true energy of the Great One. As we know from the perspective of Taoist alchemy, each individual was at one with the Great One prior to birth. The Great One manifests itself as the primal spirit in each individual. However, at the moment when one was born into the physical world, the conscious spirit inhales the energy. It mercilessly overtakes the lead of the primal spirit, and day and night, the conscious spirit lets its restless movement become, quote, bound to feelings and desires, unquote. The energy of the primal spirit is unavoidably at risk of being entirely exhausted due to the huge energetic imbalance between the conscious spirit and the primal spirit. This explains why Taoist alchemists practice circulating the light in tranquility. They strive to re-energize the terribly disturbed vitality of the primal spirit with the hope to redeem it from the grasp of the conscious spirit. As they believe, quote, a man attains this one, he becomes alive. If he loses it, he dies, unquote. This light is the golden flower, the essential energy of the Great One. It is the yang energy which sits in between the two broken yin lines in the trigram. It is the lumen naturae, the light of darkness itself. In the case of Jung's adventures in his Red Book, I suppose it is the soul that Jung tried to retrieve from the dark psychic inner world. Moreover, I would argue that the dim red sun, the scarab, and the thousands of serpents, which showed up in the very first glimpse of the world of the soul, are all manifestations of the soul in view of the fact that they all symbolize self-creation, resurrection, and eternal renewal. Infinity forges the boundlessness and timelessness of the soul. The contragram also represents the decisive timing, winter and midnight. Therefore, the revival of the dormant great one, the lumen naturae, becomes the essential task and performance of another enantiodromia process. This is so the spring will be brought to life from the grasp of the cold winter, and the dawn will force its way out of the grasp of the dark night of midnight. However, it is never an easy task to transit the liminal space. Jung seemed to be of the same mind as he mused on, quote, the chasm of antagonism, unquote, in his soul. He added, quote, it hurts, but you continue and look toward distant goals, unquote. Right after arriving at this understanding, Jung encountered and confronted Izdubar, his opposite. Quote, I wanted light. He wanted night. I wanted to rise. He wanted to sink. I was dwarfish like a child, while he was enormous like an elementally powerful hero. Knowledge lamed me, while he was blinded by the fullness of the light. And so we hurried toward each other. He ancient, I utterly new. He unknowing, I knowing. He fantastic, I sober. He brave, powerful, I cowardly, cunning. But we were both astonished to see one another on the border between morning and evening. The opposites are foreign to each other. In their first encounter, unfortunately, Izdubar was unexpectedly poisoned by Jung's knowledge. However, the goal is not to cause the defeat or death of the other. On the contrary, the desired result is the harmonious coexistence of both. In this scene, Jung illustrated a great example of the spirit of the receptive hexagram to revitalize everything, including one's opposite. He didn't forsake Izdubar. Instead, he tried to save the life of Izdubar. Jung turned him into the size of an egg and carried him down to the western land. Rise up, you gracious fire of the old night. I kiss the threshold of your beginning. Jung took great care of the egg with incantations, and when he carefully opened the egg again, Izdubar had been regenerated as he revealed, quote, I am the sun, unquote. Jung understood this process as the creation of his God, which is analogous to the Great One in Daoist alchemy, unquote. Okay, so this is one of my favorite um, parts of the Red Book, as many of you probably know, in that the passage with Izdubar indicates that Izdubar was a representative of the old beliefs, the ancient beliefs of Stone Age and Bronze Age men. And when the Iron Age came along, which was at the time of Christ, um, the old beliefs went away and had to be regenerated. And in a sense, this is what Christ's resurrection is about. And I always keep this postcard close to me. This is a sculpture by my friend Tim Holmes, whose father was a Methodist minister. And this is Mary, Mother of God, returning the nails to the Roman authorities, because nails, which represents um, the logical, and Tim didn't know this at the time that he was creating this image, which is called Returning the Nails. But nails represented the logical way of being, which is what the Roman authorities represented. And, uh, you can imagine that in this scene where Mary is handing the nails back to the authorities, um, she's saying, "Here are your nails. I will carry the future with me." And as many of you know, I painted an abstract picture some years ago, or a couple of years back now, called Tracks to Nowhere Through Magnificence. And it's metaphorically represented by the image taken by Carolyn Porco in July of 2013, I believe, from the Galileo spacecraft circling Saturn. She had the spacecraft turn back and look at the Earth through um, the rings of Saturn. And of course, in that picture, which has the Earth 800 million miles away, 800 million miles away, you can see that everything that was ever created by any living being on this planet was carried in that pale blue dot. Of course, this was a theme of Carl Sagan's during his lifetime. Uh, and um, and we're just thankful to her and to everyone and to Jung for pointing this out. And so when Izdubar appears to Jung, he represents the old way of thinking. And when Jung, in his vision, explains to Izdubar about um, about himself, or about Izdubar being a figment of human imagination, Izdubar gets sick and almost dies by the fire in the vision. But overnight, Jung has a dream, and he realizes the importance of Izdubar, the ancient ways. And he, in his imagination, forces Izdubar down into a very small size and puts him inside an egg, puts him in his pocket, and takes him into Switzerland, and then releases him with his colleagues and points the effect of that is to point out that the imagination and what exists in all religions has value. And uh, it doesn't exist in the physical world. It exists in the imagination, and that is real. Okay. It's not a question of it not being real. It is, in fact, real. That's the point here. And so Izdubar was, in fact, real, and he was regenerated by Jung himself in the process of writing the Red Book. Um, okay, now, okay, I do want to read through this last little bit here. So the opposites are the opposites are foreign to each other. In their first encounter, unfortunately, Izdubar was unexpectedly poisoned by Jung's knowledge. However, the goal is not, and his knowledge being that Izdubar was a figment of Jung's imagination. However, the goal is not to cause the defeat or death of the other. On the contrary, the desired result is the harmonious coexistence of both. In this scene, Jung illustrated a great example of the spirit of the receptive hexagram to revitalize everything, including one's opposite. He didn't forsake Izdubar. Instead, he tried to save the life of Izdubar. Jung turned him into the size of an egg and carried him down to the western land. Rise up, you gracious fire of the old night. I kiss the threshold of your beginning. Jung took great care of the egg with incantations, and when he carefully opened the egg again, Izdubar had been regenerated. As he revealed, I am the sun. Jung understood this process as the creation of his God, which is analogous to the Great One in Taoist alchemy. And uh, as we know, many ancient religions referred to the sun god. They didn't know what they were referring to. They thought they were referring to the sun above, but they were referring to the sun within. They didn't know that. With the realization that the way does not lead between both, but embraces both, Jung set forth the second track of his alchemical opus in the years from 1916 to 1929. He devoted himself to drawing mandalas. The process of integrating the opposites is what happens in psychological development, in the individuation process. Whether it be to integrate the shadows hidden in the personal unconscious, or to reconnect with the self latent in the collective unconscious. It is a process in which the original propensity to wholeness becomes a conscious happening. The same circular opus as mentioned in The Secret of the Golden Flower. Quote, when the light is made to move in a circle, all the energies of heaven and earth, of the light and the dark, are crystallized. That is what is termed seed-like thinking, or purification of the energy, or purification of the idea, unquote. So again, this is why my advice was to either go to an art store or um, go out and do whatever it is that you are building, whether it's an opus in a school district or what have you, because what will happen is, and this is your individuation process, what happens is you find the things that yourself wants and you find the things that yourself doesn't want, and you follow the path. Um, and So symbolically, this magic circle is a mandala. It occurs especially after a long struggle of psychic disorientation, and it symbolizes the new order derived from the reorientation of inner polarity. When it becomes apparent to the conscious mind, it appears as an unimpressive point or dot. It requires the individual to undergo a great deal of hard work, furthering the process with the perseverant spirit of the mare so as to complete the integration. Image 129 in the Red Book could be a great demonstration of this. As we can see, in spite of all the incomprehensible adventures, Jung submitted to the unknown process and tried to listen to it. I believe that being so, the thousands of black serpents from the very first glimpse of the world of the soul were integrated and transformed into the giant golden dragon of this image. And the veiled, dim red sun was revived to be a profound crystal light. The gifts of the darkness are full of riddles. The way is open to whomever can continue this in spite of riddles. There are dizzying bridges over the eternally deep abyss, reads the text on the page opposite to this image. Psychologically, what is awakened is the voice of the self. It is the voice of a fuller life, of a wider, more comprehensive consciousness. At this point, the work of the receptive hexagram is done, and rotationally, the creative hexagram will again be enlisted to carry out the task of further growth of the newborn light. A new circulation of light starts. Coming back to the spirit of our time, I, I am reminded of a piece of news on Facebook in the same November 2017 as the announcement of brain replacement surgery was announced. One of the co-founders of Facebook, Sean Parker, admitted in an interview that all of their designs are intentionally exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. They consciously aim to consume as much of the user's time and attention as possible. He confessed to the public, it literally changes your relationship with society, with each other, unquote. This confession is like a dim light that emerges in the conscious mind of the individual and awaits further crystallization. I take this case as an example that, however overly one-sided our time is, the latent force of self reveals itself in the individuals and starts to light up the way of what is to come, unquote. Okay, there's more to this essay. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, there's not much more, so I guess I'll keep reading. Okay, the Red Book for Our Time, Section 3. Okay, the creative hexagram and the receptive hexagram are the first and primal pair of opposites in the I Ching. One creates, the other devotes. One constructs, the other contains. The limitations of one are the strengths of the other. They enable as well as bind the life of each other. The opposites are in relation, and together they crystallize the light of the Great One. When the Great One is in motion, life unfolds and grows. After encountering Izdubar in the chapter The Magician, Jung arrived at the house of the magician Philemon and his wife. In front of their house, a large bed of spring blossoming tulips flourish. I will venture that this pair of parental opposites, the creative and the receptive, found their actuality in the life of the old couple, Philemon and Bacchus. Quote, There goes old Philemon in the garden, bent with a watering can in his shaking hand. Baucis stands at the kitchen window and looks at him calmly and impassively. She has already seen this image 1,000 times, somewhat more infirm every time, feebly, feebler, seeing it a little less well every time, since her eyesight gradually was becoming weaker. This couple symbolized a world where the opposites, yang, the logos male, and yin, the eros female, are fully present to one another. Together, they enable the life of each and complete the totality. Um, Philemon worked outside, watering the plants in the garden with his shaking hands, and Baucis worked in the kitchen with her ever more feeble eyes. Each of them had their own space and tasks to do. Their harmonious and related cooperation created a beautiful life, calm and yet potent. Despite age and infirmity, they brought about a great sense of infinity. The blooming flowers in their yard eventually became a sign of the great circling energy, the symbol of the mandala. In the land of Philemon, there were not only the tulip flowers. In this chapter, the magician, Jung has inserted a golden rose. This mandala painting, Window on Eternity. This painting was based on a dream he had in 1927. In the dream, Jung was in Liverpool, which was dirty and damp. It was night and winter and dark and raining. Despite the darkness, Jung saw that the city center, there was a small island ablaze with light, and a magnolia with great reddish blossoms stood alone there. Jung was carried away by its beauty. Quote, it was as though the tree stood in the sunlight and was at the same time the source of light. Unquote. This again is the motif of the lumen naturae, the divine spark buried in the darkness. But this time it is no longer a feeble light. After 15 years of intensive dialogue with his soul, Jung had circulated this feeble light into a full illumination. While he tried to express the essence of this dream by way of drawing a mandala, the magnolia turned out to be a rose, illuminating at the center. Jung noted that it felt to him like, quote, a window opening on eternity, unquote. Jung eventually realized that the mandala is the center. It is the exponent of all paths, and it is synonymous with the self psychologically as Jung portrayed it. The self is the monad, which I am, and which is my world. Unquote. The mandala incarnates this monad, the illuminating light of darkness. A year later, in 1928, Jung drew another picture in which a golden, well-fortified castle stood in the middle. He was amazed by its Chinese features and surprised by its color and form. And then, synchronistically, he received a letter and a book from the sinologist Richard Wilhelm. Jung was requested to write a commentary on this Daoist alchemical treatise, The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is a treatise on the gem of the immortality. It is not at all surprising that Jung devoured this treatise straight away, because in it he found an undreamed of confirmation of his understanding of the mandala and the circumambulation of the center. There and then, Jung's isolation came to an end, and this spelled as well the end of his work on the Red Book. Eventually, Jung also inserted this yellow castle mandala in the chapter The Magician in the Land of Philemon. What is the value of the Red Book for our time? I still wonder. This inner journey took Jung 16 years. In the forgotten land of his soul, the small was found, the nonsense was accepted, the dark was appreciated, and the death was taken in. The abandoned other was reconnected. Thus, the dialogue and rotation of the opposites resumed and strengthened. When both were embraced, the balance was restored and the center emerged. As Jung concluded a few years later, a person whose roots are above as well as below is thus like a tree growing simultaneously downward and upward. The goal is neither height nor depth, but the center. This being so, I would say that with the creation of his Red Book, Jung demonstrated for us, the modern and postmodern women and men, that however tormented we might be to feel torn between the opposites, it is possible to embrace both. In our extraordinarily efficient technological modern life, the intellect and reason dominate. However, among all the news about AI and the conflicts among peoples, the Red Book stands like that magnolia blooming in the dark city, Liverpool. To put it another way, I imagine the presence of the Red Book in our time to remind us of the other way of being, to slow down, to listen to follow, to take in, to accept, to contain, to devote, to support, to give birth to, and to top. And on top of that, to trust where the inner vein of life will lead. Life reveals and we understand. Life reveals and we understand. In the simplicity, the apparent standstill is the forbearing of life, of eternity. Quote, heaven above, heaven below, stars above, stars below. All that is above also is below. Grasp this and rejoice. Okay, I think we got it. And I thank the author of this text, and Chia Lee is a Jungian analyst living in, who was originally living in Taiwan. I'm not sure where she makes her home anymore, but it was from an essay entitled The Receptive and the Creative, Jung's Red Book for Our Time in the Light of Daoist Alchemy. And so I've been reading from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. And thank you for joining me today. Whew, that was a special moment for me. She says, why were men in the same field as Jung jealous of him? Others in many fields were drawn to him, men and women. Well, there were opposites. Freud was a logic man. You know, he wanted to mansplain everything, and Jung's point is that there's no mansplaining the psyche. And there's only finding the center. Cherie says, is it true Jung has only one life on this earth? How does one know? Well, I guess if we talk about Jung's physical body, yes, he had only one life on this earth. But if we talk about his immortality, um, the spirit of Carl Jung is here in this discussion today, and it's carried forth in the psyches of everyone who has listened or will listen to this video. And so, in that sense, Jung has eternal life. Because even if all memory of Jung were obliterated, if nobody knew of his name and nobody had ever read any of Jung's documents from the beginning, the whole collected works, the fact is that humanity will carry forth in its heart these teachings that I give you and that you will carry forward to others. These teachings don't have to have a name on them to be immortal, and they don't have to have a book associated with them to be immortal. Jung was simply revealing the truth, if you will, the truth of the reality of the psyche. And that's all I'm doing here, too. Yeah, yeah. Cherie says, Marie Louise von France, we thank you. Absolutely. She was one of the many people that carried Jung's ideas forward, and Edward Edinger was another, as well as many others. James Hillman uh, carried it forward and further. Um, yeah, as Archifaunus says, whoever proceeds on his own path meets nobody. This is the feature of one's own path. No one comes to help him in his task. He must face everything quite alone. Danger, bad luck, wickedness, foul weather. He goes his own way. And dark dawn of the day. And Kathy says, nicely finished. Okay. So thank you all for being here. I will see you next week. And we will be reading, next week, we will be reading The Red Book of C.G. Jung and Russian Thought by Lev Kagai. So that should be interesting. Maybe it'll give us an insight about Putin. But I thank you and